Welcome back to The Engineered Angler. My name's Franco. I'm a professional engineer, a lure designer, a lure maker, and an avid fisherman. And today we're gonna make a rattle trap. Now this lure came out in the early 70s or maybe the late 60s. I know I picked up my first one when I was like 11 or 12, and I bought it at our local department store, Rockaway Sales, way back when and in New Jersey. So I'm pretty sure those stores aren't around anymore. And I think I paid maybe like 95 cents, 98 cents. I know it was close to $1 because I remember saving up $1. Now a few decades later and I'm in Florida, just when I was really being introduced to flats fishing for trout and redfish, a buddy of mine who's also a guide on the side was fishing with rattle traps and having a lot of success catching trout, redfish, flounder sometimes. I even watched him catch a cobia on one of these things. But the trick was having the floating version. Because since you're fishing in really shallow water, usually over oyster bars, if you've got a lure that floats, if it catches on that oyster bar just for a second, you can usually slack the line and let it float off and you get your lure back. And that gold finish really shows up and sends a flash out through that really shallow water. And actually the finish is something I really want to improve on because the originals had really delicate paint jobs and were easily marred. In fact, all the damage on this thing, well, most of the damage on this came from just sitting in my box. So I've been doing a little bit of experimentation in the paint booth trying to get that perfect gold mirror finish. And that's how I'm going to finish the copy I make of the rattle trap. So stick around. Making my own version of the rattle trap means changing the shape just a little bit. Starting at the chin, I want to make the bottom a little rounder so I can add a little bit more volume to the body. Because the main challenge here is going to be getting this thing to float. Now my intention is to make this completely out of Lexan, the way I did this one just a few videos ago. And this one's got the rattle balls in it too, but it doesn't float. It actually sinks pretty quickly. But except for that little chamber with all the balls in it, it's a solid block of Lexan. This has to have a big open chamber. Now the original is made out of 2 clamshells, and you can see the seam right in the middle. Each half is completely hollow. And I know the hollow part of this chamber goes way back because of this. If I set it in here just head down, it stays head down. But if I make sure all the little rattle balls go to the back, it actually will float pretty much level. So there's a couple key design elements you gotta have with one of these lipless crankbaits. Number one is having it really head heavy. So we'll have to have a place for some lead weight way up in the head. Now we need to make a chamber inside it that's as big as we can make it, because Lexan is about 20% heavier than water, so that means it sinks pretty quick. And to be able to get enough air inside the middle of this thing to overcome the weight of the lure body itself, all the hardware, the hooks, plus the rattle balls is gonna take some doing. In fact, I'm not really sure we can do it, but we're gonna give it a shot. Of course, if you're not interested in modifying the shape at all, and you wanna stick to that original shape, you can always just take it to your copier and scan a copy of it, and then you can use that as your template. The other key thing controlling this design is the fact that I want to get this really reflective gold finish. And the only way to do that is to have the outer layer be a piece of Lexan, which is what this is. So I've got 2 thicknesses of Lexan. This is 1/8 inch, and this stuff is 1/16 of an inch. So my plan is to layer these things up. So on the inside, I'll have an 1/8 inch layer, and then a 1/16 inch layer, 1/8 inch layer on the other side of that, and then finally 16th inch layers on the very outside. And of course we're looking at a cross section there, and this little tab sticking up will be the fin. So hopefully this scheme will work. We'll be designing a little bit as we build, so let's get started. All right, with all the pieces cut more or less to the same size except for this one, and this one is oversized so I can get the fin in it. I pushed the fin back just a little bit because in my experiments, a little fin on the top close to the back of the lure adds to the amplitude of the body shape. All right, so now in order to get this thing to be able to align, I've got to cut all these other ones out to the right shape first. So I'm going to glue them all together just with some temporary double stick tape, this tape runner stuff from Elmer's, and it doesn't take much, just enough so it'll hold together while I'm cutting it out. I'll have to clean that off with alcohol later, but it's a necessary step. Now I'm going to make use of my original template here. And now we're ready to cut the last 4 pieces. Alright, now I need to pull these things apart and glue the center 3 pieces together, including the one that has a fin on it. So here are the 3 pieces. I'm going to take and scuff up the outer edges with some sandpaper and then glue them together with some UV epoxy. And then I'll wipe it down with some denatured alcohol. And now I'm just squeezing some of this UV resin, mostly on the outer edge. And then when I squeeze this together, all those scratches will disappear. I'll wipe off any excess or anything that dribbled out. Then I'll set it on top of my UV light and I'll leave that there for about 30 seconds and we'll do the other half. I really need to make the rattle chamber in this thing as big as possible to have the best chance for this thing to actually float. So I'm putting in what I think is going to be the location of my screw and eyes, and I'm just drawing in the angle it'll go into just to make sure I'm going to get the embedment I need. And the tie-on eye is going to go 1/3 of the way back from the nose, so it's 3 inches, so it'll be 1 inch back, and I'll just put a line here. And the belly hook eye, which will go down here. Now I want to put a lead ball way up front as a separate weight, and then the rest of that is going to have to come out. I need to install the tail hook eye so I have a way to hold on to the lure. So I injected a little bit of UV epoxy in there. I clamped it to make sure that the pieces don't want to pull apart and set it with my UV flashlight. Now I have to actually physically measure the volume using some water and a scale. And now I need to submerge this thing in the water, but I need the sides on it and I need it so it doesn't leak. So I'm just going to take some petroleum jelly and smear it all around this edge so it's thick enough so it acts as like a gasket. All right, now I've zeroed out the scale with the water on it, and I'm just going to submerge the body of the lure in here and try not to touch the sides or the bottom, and I get 15.8 grams. And because water weighs 1 gram per cubic centimeter, the 15.8 also is the volume in cubic centimeters. So this lure, with all the hardware and the rattles and the hook and the paint job and everything, can't weigh more than 15.8 grams. And now I'm worried. So let's go ahead and weigh the body. It's 12.6, and let's put the rest of the hardware on here. The hook eye and tie-on eye, the 2 hooks, split rings, and we got 13.9. So that means we have less than 2 grams. Actually, ideally, we want to go about 1.5 grams. So let's see how many BBs we can actually have in this thing. So I want to try to keep it no more than 15 grams. 3 BBs in that giant chamber. Is it going to be worth it? Now, the alternative is that I could go ahead and cut that center portion out of wood, and that would lighten this thing up a lot. So what would you guys do? Go for this iffy design or go for the sure thing? Back up and make the center part out of wood. I gotta take a moment to think about this. All right, so instead of making a decision based on frustration, I went ahead and just stuck everything inside the lure, the balls and the hardware, resealed the halves with Vaseline, and now let's see if it actually floats. Oh, it does, but just barely. And we're still missing a critical item, which is the nose weight, which is absolutely necessary. So obviously we have no choice. We're gonna have to make that center section out of wood. And the quickest and easiest thing to use is a paint stirring stick. So let's get at it. All right, so there it is, cut out. Now all I need to do is cut out that big rattle chamber again, and we'll be back in business. So not every lure build comes out perfect, but this gives me an opportunity to answer the question of the week. So what I've selected for the question of the week is a really common question. People ask me, how strong is an embedded and glued in twist eye that you make yourself out of a piece of wire? This is a perfect opportunity to test this little twist eye with about 3/8 of an inch embedment in Lexan and glued in with epoxy UV resin. And I'm going to connect it to my hoist, which has a little crane scale on it, and we're gonna go ahead and pull this thing apart, see how it breaks. All right, so I've got it connected with a twisted eye wire, and I'm gonna put a carabiner right through the body. All right, there's no load on it. All right, here we go. All right, so as important as the amount of force it took to actually break it is the way it actually broke. It actually ruptured the Lexan. But that little twist eye, even though it bent, never came out. And I think if this lure had been completely assembled with the outer plates glued on, I think it would have held a lot more load. All right, let's do our final weight calculations. Here's the body. It weighs 2.6 grams, amazing, so light. And I wanna put this 2.6 gram split shot in there as my nose weight. Here's our hooks and our hook hangers and tie-on-eye. Make sure we got both split rings. We're at 7.2 grams. And then our two body plates, now we're at 12.2. I don't want to exceed 14 and a half grams. So let's see how many BBs we need to get there. That's 14 and a half right there, exactly. So we got 7 BBs. Let's go with that. All right, so I went ahead and put in the weight in the nose, and I've got these end plates just temporarily glued on with that double stick stuff, because while it's still in this state, I need to be able to sort of round off the corners on the top and bottom. I won't be able to taper it much because I don't want to go all the way through the Lexan, which is the biggest drawback to having this wooden centerpiece. But anyway, we'll do what we can. It may not be beautiful, but I think it's gonna work anyway. All right, I think you can see I got it rounded off along that edge and the bottom too. And I think it looks pretty good, and it's kind of rectangular, but I think it's still gonna really work. All right, I've pulled it apart again, and I've mounted the two outside pieces on my paint stands so I can get the process started here. At this point in the build, I'm feeling like I've made so many compromises. I'm not actually making the Rattle Trap people suggested I should make, and I'm not making the floating Lexan lure that I wanted to make. So we've got some hybrid here. Hopefully it'll work, and hopefully my idea of getting this really reflective surface on there works and looks good. So the way I'm going to get that really reflective surface is by using this stuff. It's called Looking Glass by Krylon. This is a really small can. It's only 8 ounces. I think it costs like 11 bucks, so it's not that cheap. But what's really cool and what works here really well is that it's designed to be sprayed on the inside of glass so that when you look at the outside, it looks like a mirror. The way you use it is you mist it on really light, let it flash off, and then give it like 3 or 4 more coats that way. It flashes off in about 3 minutes, so you can recoat really quickly. I'm gonna have to turn on the vent fan and we'll get started. All right, so I think that's enough coats. So now to really enhance it, I'm gonna paint the back black. And now I'm going to install the tie-on-eye because it's the only one I have to install now before I put the side plates on, because I need to be able to get in there to bend out the wires on the eye so that it stays in there. Alright, now I've got the wires bent and I've got them coated with some UV resin, and I put some UV resin down into the hole, so that should hold it really well. Alright, so the last thing I want to do to the two halves is coat the inside over the black paint with some UV resin. And what that'll do is it'll create a really hard, thin layer that'll protect the paint from the BBs. So I'm going to put a really thin coat on this thing, as thin as I can possibly do it. Alright, so now that the epoxy's set on the inside of these cheek pieces, I'm going to go ahead and glue them onto the center part of the body using some Gorilla epoxy glue. And we'll do this one at a time. I'll let the first one set pretty much till it's almost completely hard before I can put the BBs in there, because I don't want the BBs to stick to the glue. And I'm going to need very little, so I'm going to mix very little. and a really thin layer will do the trick. And I'll just align this thing best I can, and then I'll put a little clamping pressure on it with these little clamps. 10 minutes should do it. All right, the glue is mostly set. Now I can put the BBs in here. I don't know if you can hear that, but it sure has a nice clacky sound when you drop them in there. Now I'm going to take a couple of these magnets and put it on the underside, and that'll hold the BBs in the center. It won't let them fall or go to the edges, just in case I get a little too much glue in there. Try not to put too much on here. Take off a little excess and then just drop in the plate. Wipe off any squeeze out. Clamp it in place, make sure it's nicely aligned on the center, and I'll just leave this sit for at least 20 minutes. Now I'm cutting out a new dorsal fin so I can embed it in the center of the wooden body. And I'll cut a quick slot with my Dremel tool and glue it in with UV epoxy. The light travels all the way to the bottom of the slot through the plexiglass. A little final shaping with the sandpaper, and we got it. And now a really thin clear coat just to even out all the seams. Alright, we're going to turn this thing gold with some golden yellow transparent paint. Alright, well, I'm pretty happy with the paint job. What it lacks in a graceful shape, it makes up in a nice looking paint job. This is definitely the kind of traditional paint job you would have seen these rattle traps come in at the store. And it has a real legit rattle too. So I'll go ahead and let the paint job dry, and then I'll give it a coat of the Minwax polyacrylic as a mid coat, just to seal the paint. And then it'll be time to clear coat it. Alright, it's the next day and I just pulled it out of the chamber. I really like it, and it has a really nice reflective surface, and the rattle sounds really good. And you tell me which is which. Which one is the original Rattle Trap and which one is mine? Number 1 or number 2? Put your guess in the comments and I'll put the answer in a pinned comment. We'll see who gets it right. Well, the good news is it came out looking really nice. The bad news is this. After I put the hooks on it, I thought, let me see what it weighs. And look at that, 15.9 grams. You remember the whole ordeal of trying to keep it below 15.8 grams. Now I got 15.9. I think what happened is that I didn't account for that fin on top and the extra couple of layers of clear coat. So my guess is that it's gonna sink, probably slowly. The physics just don't lie. All right, here goes. Oh, and it sinks a little faster than I thought. I'm going to take the hooks off and see if it still sinks. All right, no hooks. Oh, it floats. All right, without the hooks, it weighs 14.4 grams. So I definitely did not include all the things that I added. The fin, all the clear coats in the eye. But I think I screwed up on the volume too, because when I switched to the wood, I never went back and did a volume calculation. I forgot that the original had 2 pieces of 1/8 inch and 1 piece of 1/16 inch Lexan. That would be 0.31 inches, and the wood is only 0.235 inches. So that little bit less volume is what sunk me, literally. Well, that's what happens when we're working on the hairy edge of possibilities of trying to get a lure that's this thin to float and still be weighted correctly so it actually swims like a lipless crankbait. As usual, I'll put a little slideshow at the end so you guys can see the details a little closer. Let's see what it looks like from the surface. Looks like it has a pretty nice swim. About the same as the original, just kind of a tight wiggle. Let's see how straight it comes back. Looks pretty good. And I'm bringing it back at a pretty good clip, even though it really doesn't sink that fast. Definitely get a bigger action with a thicker body. Let's get some underwater shots. Well, this one was a mixed bag, wasn't it? It swims pretty good and it casts pretty nicely. I wish I had a little more action and I wish it floated, but we'll get it on the next one. If you're enjoying the content on these videos, subscribe and give me a thumbs up. See you guys next Friday.